So, what is the role of agencies in the future of employer branding? Now, this is just one of the things I spoke to about with Nick Homer. And Nick has been in employer branding roles in agencies and in house. Most recently, he is at Chapter 2. So, he brings a really good perspective from both sides. Now, we had a broader conversation about the future of what's next for employer branding. And we decided to take this out as a separate conversation where we look at the role of agencies in the future of employer branding. So let's get into the chat.
The world is changing, and the setup that exists now with employer brand with so many more specialists in-house is different because commercially it's a really easy discussion. Do I pay an agency £300,000 or £400,000 a year, or do I hire someone in-house for a quarter of that? And we've got some marketing resource they can probably use, and it's only post out on LinkedIn. And there is a level that can be delivered. I think where agencies really come into their own, of course, is one creative, the creativity aspect. I'm really pleased this year because it's been a while. I was really pleased this year at the RADs to see some really creative work coming. It's felt for a while that there's been a bit of a dearth of that. It was good to see creativity coming to the fore again, and that's where agencies can add real value. But there's also the experience of, as we all know, being in similar situations, having delivered probably for competitors. But I think that knowledge transfer, I talked at the start about how actually for some of the in-house teams, people who've worked agency side are a brilliant fit because they've had those experiences. And I think there's then a question mark, isn't there, to say, well, is there a role for agencies to be able to transfer some of that knowledge? Like how would that work? What does that look like? Can agencies mold themselves in a different way? And I think across the whole marketing piece, I think there are a lot of conversations around what does a marketing agency model look like? What do clients really want from it? And it's not quite right at the moment, because it's like, do clients getting the value they need from agencies? They're getting the right value that they need from agencies? Are agencies getting the kind of work that they thrive on back in return? I think the answer to that question on both sides is not enough. Clearly there is great work that that is happening in that space, but what's the requirement? In-house, do you still in a place where where an agency really wants someone to just hand over the work and say run with it, or do they need an agency who is going to actually mold around the team and fill in the gaps? And the gaps won't be perfect, but the expertise that's there will really complement and amplify what is happening with those in-house teams. And I think that feels much more exciting because there's still opportunity for creativity in there, but I think there's also opportunity to have a much bigger impact, and an impact that is is felt internally and felt within the business. Every employer brand team is going to have OKRs and KPIs, and they're trying to hit dials that they are trying to move, and agencies can really help them get there better and more efficiently, for sure. But agencies also need to be mindful of that.
I think actually also you think about it, as always happens in these cycles, is when there are layoffs in agencies, then you have these small entities sprouting out from here, there, and everywhere. So I think there is that thing about also the role of independents here, independent consultants, who can go in and just bolt into a team every now and then to then accelerate their impact. I'm maybe being a bit biased because that's what I like doing, but I think I'm doing it for a reason, because I think that's a big thing. I think you're absolutely right about agencies and that creativity. Some of the best times I've had is when you're in the same building as some great creative minds, different mindsets, and you build something really, really great together because you have all those different experiences from lots of different companies. It's really, really helpful. But then, this thing about being able to provide, develop that in-house capability, I think is a great opportunity for agencies, really, because then actually maybe they get brought in more, maybe smaller budgets, but more often, or they get brought in for when the bigger budgets are there, then they're brought in because the big budget has the business case as the foundation. But yeah, it's interesting times.
It really is, but also I think it's exciting times as well. As I said, there were just those sort of little shoots of creativity, almost sort of like resurgence. I thought kind of looking at the Rad's work, and there are some standout pieces that are there, and but it's back to what's the investment going to be in employer brand? Like, how important is it? Does it have a seat at the top table? All of those things obviously kind of like drive, the obviously kind of like drive the budget, but drive the enthusiasm of an organization towards it. And if they understand it and can see the return on it, then it becomes an easier conversation. It really becomes an easier conversation to have. I really like we were talking about in terms of, so like some of these, kind of where an industry unfortunately sort of like sheds people, you will get a few groups that come together and say, we could do something, and like, let's do it differently, let's do it better. And that's really healthy because it pushes everybody else off. It disrupts things, it rattles a few cages, but it's probably a good time for that. And I would, I hope that as hard as it is right now, I also hope that actually from that comes much greater work and actually really like a much stronger industry over the next couple of years.
Sure, and I think if you think about it, looking at say the Rads as an example, because you're talking about it, is look at maybe say 7 years ago, the agencies that were there, pretty much the usual suspects. But now the diversity of agencies, even in-house teams doing it themselves, that diversity of representation is, I think, really, really good and that in itself just creates innovation, doesn't it? Innovation because you get smaller entities doing stuff, but also it makes the bigger agencies think about how they're doing things as well. I think it's great, and it's not surprising. Couldn't go to the Reds this year, but I did hear about it, and you're not the first person to say that kind of. There's a stronger sense of creativity coming through in this year's Reds. It's great to see.
And it pushes everybody else on to do better work. It really does, because it makes people sit up and think, oh, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that? But actually, let's go and do something better. Where's our great idea going to come from for next year to enter? And I'm excited about that because it feels like it feels like a good time to be able to do it. So, fingers crossed, I guess.
Nick, really appreciate it. It's been a good chat. It's always good when we have a chat. I think anyone who's interested in listening to a longer episode with me and Nick, where we talk about kind of the future direction of employer branding. It covers off some of the elements we talked about here, but if you want to kind of deep dive into it a bit more, then pop to the link somewhere near this video or near this podcast episode. Good man. Cheers, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's good to see you.